Maya Evans was a lone white-hat hacker who broke into Power's quiet room and found a ledger of lies. What she exposed cost her everything, and still saved a city. Maya Evans learned the city by its electricity, where the lights sagged at dusk, which subway lines hummed like caged bees, and which municipal servers kept secrets behind polite interfaces. She moved through code the way other people moved through rooms, fingers remembering the curves and pulls where logic hid its soft underbellies. She had been small once in a house that smelled of boiled rice and antiseptic tea, her mother's cough a steady metronome at night. Computers were an escape that grew into vocation. First a borrowed laptop, then trust from local nonprofits, then quiet contracts helping community groups patch holes in their websites. She called herself a white hat because she had always preferred the narrow path. She wanted to prove that code could be a prosthetic for the powerless. By day, Maya worked freelance, patching systems, securing email servers for a church, coding donation widgets for a shelter. By night, she kept watch in the other way, scanning, learning, practicing restraint. The city produced its shapes and shadows. She wanted to map them so she could see where help might be poured. She did not thirst for notoriety. She craved accuracy, the right answer in a world that too often mistook. Noise for truth. The mayor's office was an old building wrapped in a new skin of glass and PR. Its public face smiled in press, releases and ribbon cuttings. Its private backroom stored contracts, undisclosed meetings, and a server cluster humbly tucked beneath a maintenance hatch. To those who only knew the facade, the interior was bureaucratic logic. Spreadsheets, procurement records, innocuous PDF memos. To someone who listened with packets and pings, it could become a map of influence. Rumors drifted before the winter thaw. They were the kind of rumors the city eats, odd donations flowing to shell organizations, zoning exceptions that bent in ways that favored certain developers, a cultural fund that paid out small grants to foundations which then bought advertising for the mayor's campaign. None of it read like a scandal at first. It read like a set of fingerprints left by someone who thought the machine impenetrable. Maya found those rumors in a quiet queue of security logs. A volunteer at a neighborhood clinic had asked her to audit a donation portal suspected of funneling money into an unusual account. She dove into the code not for headlines but to protect a tiny charity from shakedown. One string of logs led to another. One misnamed table led to a second misconfiguration. The trail smelled faintly like coincidence until it did not. The deeper she went, the more the city's neat architecture unraveled into small acts of human design. Scripts that redistributed public grants to partner organizations that did not exist, contracts awarded without open bids, anonymized donor lists that matched email domains linked to corporate interests. The pattern was not a single fraud, but a system designed to reroute public trust into private channels. Whoever had built it was careful and small-handed. The work felt like the craftsmanship of someone who wanted plausible deniability as a craft. Maya did what she always did first: document. She made copies, hash-signed files, and arranged evidence in digital folders named with dates and neutral tags. She took screenshots of ledger entries that paired municipal IDs with company shells, archived server responses that revealed access times, and collected email headers showing internal approvals. She made a paper trail that could not be shoved under a rug of bureaucracy. Her fingers moved with the familiarity of decades compressed. The habit of safeguarding, encrypt, copy, verify, was like prayer, precise gestures to make fragile things sacred. She stored keys in encrypted drives, split backups across cloud lockers she reviewed herself, and left breadcrumb notes in places only she could read. If the city swallowed her work whole, the record would remain. If she were ever forced to step back, the memory of what had been found would not be lost. She did not tell anyone at first. Trust is a high-cost currency, and the people she trusted were too few. The nonprofits would be compromised by leaks. The press could be coaxed into campaigns that traded nuance for clicks. Instead, she watched and waited, compiling context and creating a chronology so tight that it would not be easy to accuse her of inventing connections where none existed. The ledger she discovered had an elegance that chilled her. Simple SQL joins, tallies that transferred public cultural funds to a series of arts partners, then to PR firms that suddenly ran pro-mayor campaigns under civic engagement banners. On paper, it looked respectable. The trick was in the timing. Transfers occurred just after zoning approvals. Grant releases matched a developer's project timeline, and a pattern of private email aliases linked to a procurement officer who had a known history of consulting on the side. When she traced one alias back to a private IP used at a prominent developer's office, she realized the architecture was not simply corrupt, it was bespoke. Someone had built a discrete highway through municipal ethics and expectations, a path that allowed favors to become profit without the discomfort of a smoking gun until you looked long enough to find one. Maya had been trained in restraint, but there are kinds of correctness that require action. She drew a line for herself. She would not expose anything unverified. She would ensure the story could not be co-opted into rumor. In the quiet of her tiny flat, she prepared a dossier, an ordered, time-stamped, and cryptographically sealed packet that would withstand scrutiny. She labeled it not for broadcast, but for accountability. If the city's institutions failed to act, higher courts or public interest lawyers would have what they needed. Still, she knew the stakes. The city had lawyers with polished shoes and funds to tie up any whistleblower in litigation. The mayor had a campaign chest big enough to dull reporters' appetite for discomfort. She counted in the currency she knew: her solitude, the small network of vetted allies, and the one instrument she trusted most: disclosure at the right pressure point. Her plan was surgical rather than theatrical. She would not hand the dossier to a single journalist and hope for fireworks. She would give it to a tiny coalition, a non-profit legal clinic that defended public interest cases, a senior ethics reporter known for careful, slow work, and a trusted community organizer whose precinct had been harmed by the zoning deals. Each recipient would receive a piece of the puzzle with verification traces so they could cross-check without exposing sources. Before she distributed anything, she made one more pass through the mayor's servers. She wanted to understand the full shape of the scheme, the triggers, the chain of approvals, and who signed where. Her fingers slipped into a corner of the system where access logs were lax and permission inheritance had been left to human error. There, between midnight backups and auto-archived minutes, she found a line that was not a transaction but a directive, a scheduled script that would, on command, anonymize donor records and purge certain audit trails after a fiscal quarter closed. The script read like a tidy confession wrapped in code. It did not say delete, not exactly. It flagged items for archiving, then moved them to a private repository under a name that matched a known shell company. The intent was clear. Whoever had written it hoped that a neat line in a log, later archived in corporate accounts, would prevent investigators from following the money. It was audacious and cowardly at once. Maya took the script and placed it into the sealed packet. She knew that if she revealed it without a careful plan, it would be removed from evidence and the city would call it an internal housekeeping process. But if she timed it right, if courts, nonprofits, and the press had overlapping ability to act, the purge could be stopped as it happened, leaving the ledger intact and the perpetrators exposed. The night she sent the packet, the city slept a little less obediently. She transmitted encrypted email to the 3 chosen parties, and then waited with the kind of clinical patience she reserved for dangerous code. The morning brought the first public tremors. A small ethics reporter at a regional paper pinged her with a cautious question. The legal clinic confirmed receipt and convened counsel, and the community organizer set a meeting with city council members in neighborhoods affected by the zoning changes. But, as with any system of power, the city's engine reacted. Whoever had designed the purge was not sleeping. In the afternoon, a wave of access denials rippled through the accounts she had examined. Certain log files became inaccessible, and the mayor's IT team sent out bland notices about routine maintenance. A developer-funded PR blog published a smear, an unattributed hit piece suggesting that some unnamed tech meddler had invaded private servers. The spin was slow and precise. suspicion would be cast toward the messenger. Maya expected retaliation. The city's legal machinery was well practiced at shaping narratives and pointing fingers away from the uncomfortable center. She had an escape plan: legal counsel, a safe house, and the small community that could vouch that she worked to protect the vulnerable. Those practicalities mattered, but not as much as a human reality she could not quantify: fear's capacity to make one too careful to act again. The next move would be decisive. The legal clinic filed an injunction requesting immediate preservation of the municipal servers and logs. The reporter prepared a slow-burn story that would publish a verified timeline. The community organizer mobilized a public meeting to press the council for transparency. When the injunction hit the municipal court, the scheduled purge was paused by a single line of law. For 2 days, the city held its breath. Journalists queued for comment. Reporters who had long chased softer scandals now had a narrative that combined greed, governance, and the drama of digital evidence. The mayor's office issued denials, language trained and watery, and insisted that procurement had been clean. The PR engine's word, spinning a story of administrative complexity rather than malfeasance. In the cracks between statements and counterstatements, volunteers from civic organizations chewed through public records, matching timestamps and procurement numbers. They found patterns even Maya had not fully followed: contractors with revolving shell names, postal boxes that directed to temporary offices, and a procurement officer who had her own consulting company registered under a friend's name. The architecture was ugly and human. It smelled of lunches given to influence and off-books favors that become habit. The mayor called a press conference in the 3rd week, wearing the bland humility of a man who had rehearsed to be uncomfortable. He thanked the legal system for its diligence and promised transparent cooperation. The city listened with the practiced skepticism of a populace accustomed to broken promises. The reporter who had received Maya's packet published a careful, documented piece that evening. It did not scream, but it did speak. It placed facts in a line that could not be denied without glaring contradiction. Then the legal pushback came, harder and colder. The mayor's legal team moved to question the provenance of the leaked materials. They suggested someone had planted evidence, insinuating that the chef behind the leak had motives beyond public service. Within hours, an investigator from a municipal oversight unit requested interviews with key recipients of the packet. The line between whistleblower and criminal blurred as the city's machinery flexed its muscles. You could either be a hero in public or a suspect in private. Maya felt the old, small-house fear in her bones. She had always known her work could make enemies, but not like this. The counter-accusations were calibrated to an age-old script: discredit the messenger to spare the message. If they could prove the packet had been tampered with or falsified, the entire case would tumble into a courtroom argument about forgeries and chain of custody rather than the deeper questions of governance. She took a step she had only practiced in abstraction. She walked into public scrutiny before they could drag her there. She placed herself in front of the narrative, not with a microphone, but with proof. She triggered a chain that would tie the files she had sent irrevocably to her workstation's fingerprinted hashes, time-stamped backups, and a live stream of her work that had been recorded on a secure, redundant channel. In the age of mutable narratives, she understood that a stubborn stream of verifiable truth could be the difference between falling and being pushed. Within hours, she released a technical appendix explaining her methods: the checksum of the script, the origin IPs, the encrypted keys used to secure the copies, and an auditable log of every action she had taken. She did not try for drama. She offered forensic clarity. Her terms were legal and procedural, and that mattered to the right audiences: judges, forensic analysts, civic hackers, and those tired of rhetoric. The city watched. Opinion split quietly. On neighborhood stoops, people said she was brave. On chiller talk shows, hosts debated ethics. The mayor's office flinched. The legal motion to press charges against an unauthorized access opened like a trap. The state prosecutor weighed theft of information, invasion of systems, and the delicate intersection where law blurs with moral duty. Cyber law bites differently depending on who interprets it. Trails of evidence can become nooses when power desires a conviction. Maya had expected the possibility of arrest. She had planned for legal fights and reputational storms. What she had not expected was the personal cost that grew like slow frost. The exhaustion of being under continual spotlight. The strain on her mother who worried at every knock. The way friends began to distance themselves for fear of association. The city does not forgive easily when it feels betrayed, even when the betrayal exposes a rot that has long eaten from within. Pressure mounted. The prosecutor filed charges citing unauthorized access and potential exposure of personal data. The legal clinic mounted a defense framing her work as whistleblowing in the public interest and asserting that the public's right to know outweighed technical infractions. The press corps oscillated between human interest pieces on lonely hackers and breathless declarations about security breaches. Then came the day when the mayor's camp made its most consequential move. To save office, they offered a bargain to the system. Trade a high-profile conviction for the appearance of decisive action. Let the courts do the theater while governance remained mostly untouched. They hinted at a settlement that would include a plea and a private arrangement. The city, it seemed, wanted scapegoats less for justice than for smoke. Maya faced a choice few are offered cleanly. Go to trial and risk a conviction that would strip her of liberty and tie her to legal battles for years, potentially allowing the architecture she exposed to be reassembled once the smoke settled, or accept a plea that would limit her freedom but ensure certain provisions, the foundation of transparency measures, public records reforms, forced vendors audits, were enacted immediately and legally locked in. The bargaining felt like suturing. You cut something to save the body. She consulted the legal clinic, sat long nights with forensic accountants and community leaders, and listened to the young families whose housing projects had been skewed by zoning favors. She heard the weary eyes of nonprofit directors who wanted their funds back and the weary patience of council members who wanted institutional change rather than endless litigation. Each voice pressed at the same point. The city needed repairs that would fail if the campaign to expose remained embroiled for years in courtrooms where money buys time. Her decision arrived not like a bolt, but like a calculation made of compassion. She would take the plea. It would be a sacrificial sentence. Limited months of community supervision, restrictions on certain forms of access, perhaps a short period of house arrest. In return, the city would sign binding reforms, an independent audit board would be created, procurement transparency would be legally enforced, and the shell companies implicated would be investigated without interference. The reforms would be enacted before any political calendar could erase them. Accepting the plea meant relinquishing the possibility of a public exoneration in court. It meant her name would be attached in legal filings as someone who accessed systems improperly. It might dull the force of the moral narrative in certain circles, but it would bind the city to action that otherwise might have been put off or diluted. On the day she signed the agreement, Maya woke before dawn. She brewed tea and sat by the window that looked over the alley where teenagers chased soccer balls. She had imagined many endings to this work: triumphant vindication, glittering headlines, an award in a better cause. None of that mattered now. What mattered was whether the city would change, whether the families displaced by crooked zoning would have legal recourse, and whether future auditors could actually follow the money. Her mother held her hand as she left for the courthouse. There were no parades. There were 3 friends, a representative from the legal clinic, and a small line of community members who had come to hold space. Ethan, the kid from the neighborhood who loved neon reflections, handed her a drawing of a small figure beside a set of shining lights. She tucked it into her pocket like a talisman. The plea was brief and bureaucratic. The judge read the terms, the clerk stamped forms, and the city's legal representative signed the reforms into legal effect. Cameras flashed outside, capturing 1,000 interpretations. The headlines the next day tried to tidy the story into familiar shapes. Hacker convicted. Reforms promised. Sacrifice for the public good? Justice compromised? Opinions would swirl, but the law had been changed. In the months that followed, auditors found evidence that led to resignations and new investigations. Procurement procedures were rewritten and enforced. Purchases above certain thresholds required open bids and third-party oversight. Shell companies were dissolved. Tax audits followed. The Reform Board published quarterly reports and made public the procurement ledgers in a format activists could read. Neighborhoods that had lost access to cultural funds regained them, directed by newly formed community review councils. But the cost to Maya was real and continuing. She traded the invisible work of late-night fixes for the visible burden of court records and an imposed curfew. She was, in the eyes of some, a convicted hacker, her name attached to legal filings that would not vanish from search engines. Her mother's cough eased under the care funded by the settlement, and her apartment no longer leaked in stormy weather, but the loneliness tightened in new ways. Friends who feared association drifted. New offers came, but were tinged with caution. Yet something else occurred that legal papers could not force. A quiet legend began to form. In community centers and tech meetups, people told the story not as a crime, but as an ethical act. A lonely woman who chose the city over herself. Young coders started to learn her name not as a warning, but as a moral exemplar. Civic hackers built tools to make procurement searchable. Neighborhood watch groups organized digital literacy classes to prevent future manipulation. The habit she hoped for had begun to seed. Years later, teenagers would squat at computers and speak of the Maya packet, like earlier activists spoke of pamphlets that changed ballots. In a small gallery on the West Side, an art collective curated a show about whistleblowers and digital ethics. Among the exhibits was the encrypted thumb drive she had once made, displayed as a relic. The show's placard did not gloss the fact of her plea but emphasized the outcomes: reforms, audits, and a new civic architecture. Maya kept a different record inside her head: the nights when she had mapped spreadsheets into justice, the quiet of her mother's breath after medicine arrived, the precise way code can be kind. She had not sought martyrdom. She had chosen a path that paid with private loss but public repair. In the quiet evenings now, she taught kids in a community lab how to secure servers, how to sign documents, and how to read a ledger. She taught them restraint and courage together. Her story remained complicated. Some would always call her a criminal. Some would call her a hero. She accepted the ambiguity because history often smooths edges in ways that truth refuses. The city was different because she had been brave enough to look, careful enough to document, and practical enough to bargain for change when asked to bet everything. On the last evening before her restrictions eased, a group of volunteers from the audit board brought soup to her building. One of them, a woman from the legal clinic, handed her a printed letter signed by community leaders thanking her. The letter did not pretend everything was perfect. It acknowledged the cost and affirmed the good that had been mandated because of it. Maya folded it and slid it into the same drawer as the exoneration that would never come. She slept differently then, not without care, but with the knowledge that some debts had been repaid in reforms and humane policy. The city's servers hummed on, now a little more transparent, and the alley still smelled of frying bread and diesel. Teenagers still kicked balls in puddles, and somewhere a councilman read a procurement ledger with new respect. There was a small, private recognition that always warmed her when she least expected it. A child she once helped find his way home, no longer so small, ran up once to say, "You kept our stars from wandering." Maya laughed, hugged the boy, and let the moment be enough. Her name lived in two worlds: a legal file and a lane of stories told by community elders. Neither fully captured the whole of her. Both, in their ways, mattered. She had not sought to be legend. She had sought to be necessary. When the city again held its breath to decide between convenient comfort and disciplined honesty, someone would remember the reforms that time had made into habit. They would remember the strange bargain: a woman with a laptop who chose to accept loss for the sake of a larger repair. The story would be told with the complication it deserved: a mantle of dark justice wrapped around a white-hat hacker who paid the price and changed the rules. Maya kept teaching. She kept fixing. She kept living in the small house that smelled of tea, now with a new kettle that did not leak. She had lost leisure but gained a hard, useful peace, In the hush of night, when the city's servers slept into low electric purrs, she would sometimes open the drawer with the letter and the drawing and remind herself why she had pushed code into the light. The cost had been hers. The city's repair was a public inheritance. And somewhere, where teenagers trade myths and morals, the phrase lingered like a bright chord. A lonely hacker knocked on power's door and paid for truth. It was the form of sacrifice stories taken our age. Messy, incomplete, and ultimately human.